The statue has stood for more than a century, her face shrouded, her hands forever lifting a veil, but beneath her pedestal, the gardener says, there was a hollow, filled not with earth, but with something left behind, something that should not have been buried, and something that still bleeds, even now. The garden of the convent lies behind a wall of crumbling plaster and ivy. The air here feels cooler than the road beyond, even in summer, as though the trees overhead lean closer than they should. Shading everything in a constant half-light, the camera would move slowly over damp stone paths, past rows of untended hedges, and toward a statue that seems older than everything around it. The statue of Saint Veronica stands at the garden's center, or rather what remains of her. Her body is weathered stone, shoulders stooped beneath the weight of time, and her face is completely hidden beneath a long chiseled veil. The folds of the veil are deep, deliberate, and perfectly intact despite centuries of wind and rain. Her hands, stretched forward, clutch a cloth carved with faint, indecipherable grooves. What some believe was once the impression of Christ's face, but that detail has been almost entirely erased by erosion. Only the veil remains, untouched, as if time itself avoided it. The convent sisters keep the statue clean, not polished, never repainted, only wiped of moss, and nothing more. Even so, the air around it smells faintly of wet soil and iron. Even in dry months, visitors notice other things harder to explain. No birds ever land on the statue, not on its shoulders, not even at its feet. And while the garden itself is alive with overgrown roses and wild weeds, there is nothing, no flowers, no ivy, not even a patch of moss growing at the base of Saint Veronica the earth. There is bare, crocked. Even after rain, the locals whisper about it, quietly, not to frighten, but with a kind of practiced caution. They call it the shrouded icon, a title never written, only spoken. Some claim it was carved by pilgrims who died on the road to this convent. Others believe the veil hides a face so terrible the sculptor covered it intentionally, out of shame or fear. Most, though, simply avoid the garden after dusk. The convent itself is older than the town that grew around it, built on a rise of stone, with walls pale as bone and windows that look too narrow for their height. It feels less like a home for the devout, and more like a place built to keep something out. Or in the sisters say little about the statue. Their explanations are gentle, but rehearsed. It is only a memorial for a journey long forgotten. That's all they offer. They will not say which journey, or whose. Once a month, however, a small group of travelers arrive. They do not come for the convent services. They do not stay the night. They bring no flowers, no offerings. They simply stand in a loose circle around the statue, heads bowed. They never speak, not even to each other, and when the chapel bell rings, they leave always by the same path, always before the sun fully sets. No one knows where they go. Even the sisters will not follow them. There is a history buried in this place. Old town records speak of a way of the cloth, a pilgrimage once taken by penitents seeking forgiveness for something the church itself would not name. The route ended at this convent, or rather beneath the statue. Before it was ever erected, the records do not explain what awaited them here. Only that none of the pilgrims ever returned to their villages. Not one. Those who work the gardens say they hear things when they're alone. Small things. At first, a soft shift of gravel, like a footstep behind them. The faint scrape of stone, as though something moves against the statue's pedestal. And when they turn, nothing. Only the still, veiled figure, but the sensation lingers. A prickle at the base of the neck, a pulse in the throat, the heavy, unshakable feeling of being watched by something that cannot look back. It's easy to dismiss these whispers. The mind plays tricks in places like this, isolated, quiet, surrounded by the slow decay of things built centuries ago. But there are moments that are harder to ignore. A carpenter, hired to repair the garden gate, left his tools near the statue at dusk. When he returned in the morning, the tools were still there, but the handles, smooth wood, new, were damp and dark, as though They'd been left in a stagnant pond. The air around the statue smelled faintly of metal. Like rust. Another man, a groundskeeper, said he found a patch of his sleeve torn away after trimming the hedges near the statue. He didn't feel it rip, didn't hear the fabric catch, but when he left the garden, the cloth was gone. The tear was clean, almost deliberate, as though cut by something sharp. He swore, quietly, that he had not walked near any thorns, and he stopped tending the garden entirely after that day. Locals who pass by the convent at night sometimes report a faint sound, not singing, not chanting, something softer, more rhythmic, like breath, slow, measured, carried on the wind from somewhere behind the garden wall. But when they stop to listen, the sound stops, too, leaving only the creak of the trees and the far-off bell of the chapel. Sisters insist the statue is harmless, an old relic of faith, a marker for those long forgotten, yet they keep its base swept clean every morning, even though nothing ever grows there, even though no rain pools in its cracks. And when they speak of Saint Veronica, their voices lower, not in reverence, but in something closer to caution. No one knows who first told the story or why it persists. Generation after generation, they say if you stand before the statue in the quiet and stare at the folds of her veil long enough, you'll begin to see something, not a face, not even a shape, just a shadow, moving faintly within the carved stone. It's never the same for any two people. Some claim it's the outline of a mouth, silently open. Others, a hand pressed against the veil from the inside, and yet, when they look away, there is nothing there, only cold stone, silent, unchanged. One woman, a traveler passing through the region, was said to have touched the veil, not the cloth she held, but the veil itself. Her fingers pressed into the grooves, and she recoiled instantly, saying it felt warm, not sun-warmed stone, but the faint, living warmth of skin. She left the convent that same day. No one ever saw her again. Convent does not keep formal records of these incidents. There are no logs, no warnings posted on the garden gates, only unspoken rules, passed quietly among the sisters. Do not linger near the statue at dusk. Do not place offerings at its feet. And above all, do not touch the veil. No flowers grow at its base. No birds land on its shoulders. And though the air is still, the folds of the carved veil always seem to hold shadow. As if the sun cannot fully reach them, the shrouded icon stands, as it always has, in the center of the garden, silent, patient, older than memory, older, perhaps, than the convent itself. But something wasn't right, because last month, for the first time in years, someone left a single white candle at its feet. The flame was still burning when the sisters found it at dawn, and the wax had pooled, not on the stone, but deep into the dry, cracked earth beneath, as though the ground had swallowed it. The light falls gently in the convent garden, filtered through branches that sway without wind. Each beam seems to hesitate before touching. The ground is a silence here that isn't peace, just absence, a hush that feels placed, not earned. In near the center of the old stone path, past the roses that won't bloom, and the benches that no longer face anything worth seeing, there is the statue still unchanging, the shrouded icon. The soil beneath it has begun to sink. The groundskeeper's name is Lothair, 82, thin as thread, with wrists that tremble when he buttons his shirt. He's worked at the convent for most of his life. He never speaks of faith, only of habits. And he comes each morning with the same rhythm. First the hedges, then the outer walk, then the garden. He does not cut anything that grows near the statue. That patch has been dead for as long as he can remember. But still, he brushes away the fallen leaves, scrapes at the edges of the stone, stares at the veil without really knowing why. And for weeks, he had noticed something strange. The ground just in front of the statue's feet. It was different, softer, more fragile underfoot, as though the earth had loosened or thinned. He had thought it was an animal at first, something small, maybe a mole, burrowing underneath, but the soil was too fine. No tracks, no holes, just a shallow dip, barely visible unless you were looking for it. But Lothair was looking. He didn't tell the sisters. Not yet they had their own ideas about the statue's unspoken boundaries, routines they followed without explanation. But Lothair, he had lived long enough to know when something had shifted, and on the third morning of the depression deepening, he brought a spade, not a large one, just a hand tool, the kind you'd use to turn a few inches of dirt. He waited until the midday sun had warmed the stone path, until the chapel bell had rung, and the garden was quiet. Again and then, he knelt, pressed the spade into the soft patch, slow, gentle. The soil gave way too easily, as though something underneath wanted to be reached. He dug 3 inches, then 6. The spade struck nothing but dry earth, but he kept going, not because he had a reason, but because something in his hands had gone cold. And then, at 9 inches, the blade hit something. It didn't clang, didn't scrape like stone or metal. It thudded a low, hollow sound like striking the side of a box. Lothair froze. He brushed the dirt away with his hands, now fingers shaking, knuckles dirty, and the top edge of something appeared, wood pale, dry, and split, old, but not decayed. He thought, absurdly, that it might be a buried bench, a piece of the original garden path, perhaps left behind by some long-dead builder. But as he uncovered more, the shape became too precise, a rectangle, edges uniform, corners angled inward slightly. Almost ceremonial, it was a box, unmarked, buried just beneath the statue. And then he saw the nails. They were not like modern nails, short, thick, dark iron, oxidized to a deep reddish brown. They hadn't rusted, but they had bent slightly, as though driven in by hand, not by tool. Lothair stared at the lid. He did not open it, not yet. Instead, he pressed his ear close. He didn't know why. No sound, just the faint, cold scent of rotless earth and something else, something soft and metallic. The box wasn't large, roughly the length of his forearm, maybe longer, but not deep. It could have been a child's coffin, a reliquary, a time capsule. He didn't want to open it, but he couldn't put the earth back over it either. He sat back on his heels, the sweat now dampening the collar of his shirt. The sun had passed overhead, the air had cooled, and that's when he heard it, not from the box, not from the statue, but from behind him. Just beyond the hedge, linear rustle, quick, too quick for wind-like. Footsteps, then nothing. When he turned, there was no one, just the trees, and the distant clang of a shovel left against the stone path. Covered the box, not with the spade, with his hands, layer by layer, pushing the soil back over it, as though hiding a wound. When he stood, he didn't look at the statue. He walked to the tool shed, closed the door behind him, and sat on the floor for almost half an hour, not because he was afraid, but because he realized something he hadn't yet said aloud. The soil had been too dry, even that deep, even after the rains 2 nights ago. The wood had been warm that evening. Lothair didn't go home. He stayed in the small room behind the chapel kitchen. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. He sat with the lamp turned low, staring at his hands. There was dirt under his nails. He tried to wash them twice, but the smell, that faint metallic warmth, wouldn't leave by morning. He told one of the younger sisters, just her. She listened quietly, didn't interrupt, and when he finished, she only asked one question. Did you touch what was beneath? Lothair didn't answer, but he shook his head slowly, and her face changed. Not fear, not disbelief, just a kind of quiet resignation, as though she had expected this. They went to the garden together. The soil looked undisturbed, the surface smooth, like it had never been touched. But when she knelt beside the statue, she didn't touch the ground. She placed her hand, very gently, on the edge of the pedestal, closed her eyes, and stood again without a word. She walked back toward the chapel. Lothair never asked her what she felt that week. The depression deepened again, wider, deeper. The soil cracked in a perfect oval around the base of the statue, not from erosion, not from weight, but from something pushing upward. The sisters held a night vigil, not in the garden, but in the sanctuary doors. Closed lights dimmed, no hymnals, just silence and breath. Lothair wasn't invited, but he stood just beyond the chapel doors, listening, and sometime near midnight, he heard it again, that same thud from beneath the soil, Just once, not loud, not desperate, but unmistakably. Anaki did not return to the garden the next day, nor the day after when asked. He said he was unwell, too old, too tired, but in truth, he was afraid not of what he had found, but of what he had not uncovered, because the box had moved just slightly, but it had moved, he said, nothing more, not to the sisters, not to the others, but each night he dreamt of hands thin, hands pale, pressing up through dry soil, and in the dream, the statue's veil lifted only slightly, just enough for him to see that there was nothing underneath, only hollow darkness looking back at him. And that was when he realized he had not struck the top of the box, he had struck the side. The lid was facing down. The morning fog rolls over the convent walls. It drifts low, hugging the stones, thinning as it moves across the garden path. The air is still almost heavy beneath the statue. The soil looks different, now darker, wider, a depression, so cleanly formed it could not be mistaken for natural settling. And this time, they are not ignoring it. It is the younger sister who calls for Lothair at dawn. Her voice is quiet, not urgent, but firm enough to leave no room for hesitation. He arrives with his tools slung over his shoulder, hands wrapped in cloth, not gloves, and though he does not look at the statue, he feels its shadow as he kneels before it. The soil gives way even easier than before. No resistance. Each thrust of the spade feels like sinking into ash. No stones, no roots, just earth that feels too light for its depth. Within minutes, the wood is visible again. A corner first, and a full edge, the box, exactly where he left it, except he notices, turned slightly, as though it had shifted in the soil on its own, but he keeps digging. The box emerges slowly. It is heavier than it looks, though the wood shows no signs of decay. No insects crawl on its surface, no smell rises from beneath, only that faint, dry warmth, as if it had been sitting in sunlight. Even underground Lothair places it on the path, steps back, waits for the sister to say something. She does not speak, only kneels beside it, tracing her fingers along the edge where the nails curve inward. There is no lock, only a single iron clasp. Bent but unbroken, Lothair unhooks it slowly. The sound of the hinge moving is soft, too soft for wood. This old, the lid opens inside. There is no earth, no dust, just two objects resting against the smooth wooden base as though carefully placed. The first is a folded piece of linen, off-white, edges frayed, threads loose, but the fabric itself is damp, not soaked, not dripping, just faintly wet, as if someone had pressed it to their skin minutes before. Lothair hesitates to touch it, but the sister doesn't. She lifts it slightly, and a faint, metallic scent rises. Not blood, not mold, something colder, sharper. She refolds it, places it back, and then they see the second object, wooden rosary, simple, unvarnished beads, bound with a cord that looks newer than the wood itself. It rests in a loose coil, crossed downward, but one bead drips not constantly. Just once every few seconds a clear droplet forms, falls onto the wood of the box, spreads outward like water, but when Lothair wipes at the stain with his thumb, it smears black, thick ink-like, and it does not dry. He says nothing. Neither does the sister, but both step back. The objects don't smell of decay, don't hum or twitch or show any sign of life, and yet both of them, separately, feel a faint warmth emanating from the linen, a low, almost imperceptible tremor when the rosary is lifted, like a thread pulled taut. Neither can explain it. Neither wants to. The sister wraps the box shut, fastens the clasp, and for the first time, speaks aloud. This does not stay here. She does not ask Lothair's opinion. She does not suggest a plan, only states it, as though repeating something she was told long ago. Carry the box to the convent cellar, down a set of narrow stone steps, slick with condensation. Each footfall echoes longer than it should. The room is small, lit by a single oil lamp. The walls sweat. The smell of damp wood hangs heavy. They set the box in the farthest corner, cover it with a rough wool cloth, and leave neither. Turns back, but something wasn't right, because when they return to the garden, The depression beneath the statue is gone completely, not filled in by hand. Not uneven, the soil is flat smooth, as if it had never been disturbed at all. Even the loose dirt they'd scattered along the path is gone, swept. Almost meticulously, Lothair stares at the base of the statue. The stone looks the same. The veil, the hands, the faint grooves in the cloth, but the air feels heavier now, not colder, just thicker, as if they'd removed something the garden itself had been holding down that night. Lothair tries to sleep. He can't every time he closes his eyes. He feels it again, that subtle tremor, not in his hands, but beneath his feet like something. Shifting through dry soil, he rises before dawn, walks to the cellar, stands outside the door. He doesn't open it. He doesn't go inside, but through the wood. He hears it, not a voice, not a knock-eye, slow, soft sound, like fabric being wrung out by invisible hands. Drip, paws drip. The sisters say nothing the next morning. Breakfast is silent. The bell tolls without echo. The day moves on as though nothing has been unearthed, but Lothair notices small things. The way the younger sister avoids the cellar steps, the way another, older nun, lingers by the chapel doors, murmuring prayers not found in any hymnal. And later, when he walks the garden, he finds something new on the stone at the base of the statue, not carved, not etched, but traced faintly in that same black substance from the rosary, is a single, line-thin, almost imperceptible. It runs from the top of the pedestal down to the soil straight as a drop of water, but it does not dry that evening. He asks the younger sister again what the linen is, what the rosary means, why the soil swallowed them, and then released them. She does not answer, only says, softly, "It isn't for us to touch again." And when he presses her, she adds, "Because the veil is not meant to be opened twice." Lothair leaves the chapel that night with his lantern unlit. The garden is dark, moonlight barely spilling through the clouds. The statue is only a silhouette, the folds of its veil lost to shadow, and as he passes it, he hears something behind him, not the drip, not the rustly whisper, close enough that he feels the air shift. Near his eyrie, he turns. No one, just the empty garden. But when he looks back at the statue, the line of black on its pedestal is gone in its place. A faint, wet mark, shaped like the edge of a folded cloth, and though the soil is undisturbed, his feet sink slightly as he steps past, as if the ground itself is breathing. The morning fog rolls over the convent walls. It drifts low, hugging the stones, thinning as it moves across the garden path. The air is still, almost heavy beneath the statue. The soil looks different, now darker, wider, a depression so cleanly formed it could not be mistaken for natural settling. And this time, they are not ignoring it. It is the younger sister who calls for Lothair at dawn. Her voice is quiet, not urgent, but firm enough to leave no room for hesitation. He arrives with his tools slung over his shoulder, hands wrapped in cloth, not gloves, and though he does not look at the statue, he feels its shadow as he kneels before it. The soil gives way even easier than before. No resistance. Each thrust of the spade feels like sinking into ash. No stones, no roots, just earth that feels too light for its depth. Within minutes, the wood is visible again, a corner first, then a full edge, the box, exactly where he left it, except he notices, turned slightly, as though it had shifted in the soil on its own. But he keeps digging. The box emerges slowly. It is heavier than it looks, though the wood shows no signs of decay. No insects crawl on its surface. No smell rises from beneath, only that faint, dry warmth, as if it had been sitting in sunlight. Even underground, Lothair places it on the path, steps back, waits for the sister to say something. She does not speak, only kneels beside it, tracing her fingers along the edge where the nails curve inward. There is no lock, only a single iron clasp. Bent but unbroken, Lothair unhooks it slowly. The sound of the hinge moving is soft, too soft for wood. This old, the lid opens inside. There is no earth, no dust, just two objects resting against the smooth wooden base as though carefully placed. The first is a folded piece of linen, off-white, edges frayed, threads loose, but the fabric itself is damp, not soaked, not dripping, just faintly wet, as if someone had pressed it to their skin. Minutes before Lothair hesitates to touch it, but the sister doesn't. She lifts it slightly, and a faint, metallic scent rises. Not blood, not mold, something. Colder, sharper. She refolds it, places it back, and then they see the second object, a wooden rosary. Simple, unvarnished beads, bound with a cord that looks newer than the wood itself. It rests in a loose coil, crossed downward, but one bead drips not constantly. Just once every few seconds, a clear droplet forms, falls onto the wood of the box, spreads outward like water. But when Lothair wipes at the stain with his thumb, it smears black, thick ink-like, and it does not dry. He says nothing. Neither does the sister, but both step back. The objects don't smell of decay, don't hum or twitch or show any sign of life. And yet, both of them, separately, feel a faint warmth emanating from the linen. A low, almost imperceptible tremor when the rosary is lifted, like a thread pulled taut. Neither can explain it. Neither wants to. The sister wraps the box shut, fastens the clasp, and for the first time, speaks aloud. This does not stay here. She does not ask Lothair's opinion. She does not suggest a plan, only states it, as though repeating something she was told long ago. They carry the box to the convent cellar, down a set of narrow stone steps, slick with condensation. Each footfall echoes longer than it should. The room is small, lit by a single oil lamp. Walls sweat, the smell of damp wood hangs heavy. They set the box in the farthest corner, cover it with a rough wool cloth, and leave. Neither turns back, but something wasn't right, because when they return to the garden, the depression beneath the statue is gone completely, not filled in by hand, not uneven. The soil is flat, smooth, as if it had never been disturbed at all. Even the loose dirt they'd scattered along the path is gone, swept, almost meticulously. Lothair stares at the base of the statue. The stone looks the same, the veil, the hands, the faint grooves in the cloth, but the air feels heavier, now not colder, just thicker, as if they'd removed something the garden itself had been holding down that night. Lothair tries to sleep. He can't. Every time he closes his eyes, he feels it again, that subtle tremor, not in his hands, but beneath his feet, like something shifting through dry soil. He rises before dawn, walks to the cellar, stands outside the door. He doesn't open it. He doesn't go inside, but through the wood. He hears it, not a voice, not a knock, slow, soft sound, like fabric being wrung out by invisible hands. Drip, pause, drip. The sisters say nothing. The next morning, breakfast is silent. The bell tolls without echo. The day moves on as though nothing has been unearthed, but Lothair notices small things. The way the younger sister avoids the cellar steps, the way another, older nun, lingers by the chapel doors, murmuring prayers not found in any hymnal. And later, when he walks the garden, he finds something new on the stone at the base of the statue, not carved, not etched, but traced faintly in that same black substance from the rosary, is a single, line-thin, almost imperceptible. It runs from the top of the pedestal down to the soil, straight as a drop of water, but it does not dry that evening. He asks the younger sister again what the linen is, what the rosary means, why the soil swallowed them, and then released them. She does not answer, only says, softly, "It isn't for us to touch again." And when he presses her, she adds, "Because the veil is not meant to be opened twice." Lothair leaves the chapel that night with his lantern unlit. The garden is dark, moonlight barely spilling through the clouds. The statue is only a silhouette, the folds of its veil lost to shadow. As he passes it, he hears something behind him, not the drip, not the rustle, a whisper close enough that he feels the air shift near his ear. He turns. No one, just the empty garden. But when he looks back at the statue, the line of black on its pedestal is gone. In its place, a faint, wet mark, shaped like the edge of a folded cloth. And though the soil is undisturbed, his feet sink slightly as he steps past, as if the ground itself is breathing. The garden at night is not silent. It only seems that way at first. when the last bell fades, and the sisters retreat to their cells. The quiet feels deep enough to swallow sound, but if you stay long enough and let your ears adjust to the stillness, you begin to hear a faint murmur, carried low along the paths. Not the wind, not the trees, something softer, rhythmic, like voices whispering behind the hedges, and it always begins near the statue. The sisters first noticed it 3 nights after the box was sealed in the cellar. At Compline, when the last prayer is spoken and the candles are extinguished, one of the younger nuns, Sister Elaine, paused at her window. Her cell overlooked the garden. It was dark, the moon was hidden, but she heard something through the glass, not a chant, not a hymn whispers too soft to distinguish words, but clear enough to count 3 voices speaking in unison, repeating something over and over in a language she couldn't name. She thought at first it was other sisters gathered by the statue, perhaps a late vigil or private devotion. But when she leaned closer to the window, she saw no lanterns, no movement, only the faint outline of Saint Veronica, her veiled face just a darker shape against the sky. The whispers didn't stop, not until she closed the shutters, and even then, she thought she heard them, faintly, beneath the sound of her breath. The next night, another sister heard it, this one, outside. Walking back from the kitchen after extinguishing the fires, she paused on the path. The voices were clearer here, lower, steadier, repeating phrases at measured intervals, like a litany. She strained to listen. The words were unlike anything she had learned, not Latin, not French, not any tongue she recognized, but the cadence was unmistakable, prayers delivered in a tone both pleading and commanding. When she took a step toward the garden gate, the voices stopped instantly. The only sound that followed was the slow creak of branches. Though there was no winch, she did not enter the garden. She locked the kitchen door and hurried back to her cell by the 3rd night. The whispers had reached nearly every sister, some from their windows, some passing through the cloister, and one sister, Beatrix, who swore she heard them through the chapel walls themselves. But there was more. A line, the first to hear them, said she had seen something. She waited until the others were silent, then whispered. The veil had moved. The others stared. Some frowned. One made the sign of the cross. Elaine's voice did not rise, but it trembled. I was watching from the window. It was just before the bell for matins. The garden was still, the statue was still, but the veil, it shifted only a little, like a cloth in a draft, except there was no wind. She didn't blink as she spoke, didn't look away, and I think something underneath was pushing outward. No one answered. The room was too quiet. Even the distant rustle of the trees seemed to pause finally. The Mother Superior spoke. Her voice was measured, but strained at the edges. None of you will return to the garden after dusk. No vigils, no prayers, no glances from your windows. Her gaze held each of them one by one. And if any of you hear it again, you will not listen. The order was obeyed, at least outwardly. The sisters shuttered their windows before sunset, locked the garden gate with iron, kept to the inner halls. But the whispers did not stop. They became more deliberate, more insistent, always low, always near the statue. And now, sometimes they would pause for long stretches, long enough for the listener to think they were gone, only to resume suddenly, with a single drawn-out syllable that did not belong to any language spoken aloud. Lothar heard them too. He didn't tell the sisters, but each night, as he lay on the narrow bed in the kitchen quarters, the sound came faintly through the cracks in the shutters. It felt closer to his ear than the garden's distance allowed, like the murmurs weren't carried by air, but by something heavier, the kind of sound that feels inside the bones. Not just the ears. He tried blocking it, cotton cloth, even pressing his hands against his head, but it was not a sound you could shut out. It came through the floor, through the wood of the bed frame, through the earth itself. On the 5th night, Sister Beatrix disobeyed the order. She rose just after midnight, unlatched her window. The moon was thin, clouds streaking across it like smoke. She leaned out, straining her eyes. The whispers were clearer than ever, not louder, just sharper, each syllable cutting through the stillness like a blade. And then she saw it, not the voices, not the speakers. The veil it hung the same as always, still carved folds of stone, shadow pooling where the moonlight could not reach. But as her eyes adjusted, she swore the folds were different, shallower, looser, as though the veil itself had thinned. She blinked. For a moment, she thought she could see something behind it. Not a face, not even a clear shape, just the faint suggestion of movement, slow, measured breathing. Her fingers slipped from the windowsill, the shutter swung closed, and the whispers stopped the next morning. Beatrix didn't speak, didn't eat. Her eyes were fixed on the floor as the others filed past her. The Mother Superior noticed. She did not ask questions, only tightened the rule. No one approaches the garden day or night until I say otherwise. But something wasn't right, because that evening, as the last rays of sun touched the convent walls, the air grew heavy, thicker than before. Every sound, the bell, the birds, even the sisters' voices felt muted, swallowed, and from the closed windows, from the locked doors, they all heard it at once. Not the whispers, not the murmurs, a single sound. Sharp, sudden stone shifting against stone. It came from the garden, from the base of the statue. Some claimed it was just settling, a piece of the pedestal cracking in the night air. But others swore they heard something else. Just beneath it, the soft scrape of cloth, not fluttering, not blowing, being drawn aside. No one went outside to look, not that night, not after, but at dawn. When the garden gates were unlocked, the ground before the statue was different again. The soil was smooth, the pedestal clean, and on the stone just beneath St. Veronica's veiled face, there were 3 faint marks, shallow, curved like fingertips pressed into the surface, and dragged downward. The road to the convent is long stone and dirt, winding through fields that have long since turned to scrub. There are no markers, no signs, only the faint line of the garden walls visible in the distance, like a pale scar against the hills. The man who walks it now is older than the stones, his back bent, his hands knotted by years of work. He carries nothing with him but a cane and a folded scrap of cloth, worn so thin it's almost translucent. He does not speak as he walks, not to himself, not to the air. Only when he reaches the gates does his voice return. He is the last living pilgrim who came here when the statue was new decades ago, before the convent stopped receiving travelers, before the garden became a place avoided rather than venerated. He does not remember all the faces. Most of the others never left, but he remembers why they came. It wasn't for miracles, not for healing, not for visions of light or voices from heaven. It was for the veil. He says the veil had been seen here, not the statue's veil, the real one, the one they claimed St. Veronica carried, a scrap of cloth that bore the faint impression of a face. It didn't appear in daylight, never during prayer in the chapel, only in the garden, and only at night, and not to everyone, only to those who prayed. Not for blessings, not for others, but for forgiveness of a sin they had never confessed aloud. He lowers his gaze when he says this. His hands tremble on the cane. He does not tell what his sin was, only that he spoke it under his breath, in the shadow of the statue, and waited. At first, nothing. The garden was still, the leaves unmoving, the soil hard beneath his knees, and then he felt the air shift, not colder, not warmer, just thinner, like the weight of the night had been lifted. For a moment, when he opened his eyes, he saw it. The veil was not resting on the statue, not on the stone figure at all. It hovered, a pale shape, just beyond the reach of the moonlight, folded edges trembling as if stirred by an unseen hand. No face upon it, no holy glow, just the faint shimmer of fabric suspended where nothing should have been. And as he watched, he realized it was moving closer, not floating, not gliding, but descending slowly, deliberately. He says he could not move, could not speak. His chest felt locked, as though the very air was holding him still. And when it stopped, it was no longer above him, it was around him. He does not explain what happened then, only that his vision blurred. The edges of the garden faded. He could hear the other pilgrims nearby, their voices low, their prayers turning from whispers to frantic gasps. Some of them screamed not loud, just sharp, sudden bursts, cut off as quickly as they began. He remembers the earth beneath him softening, hands not his own pressing gently at his back, guiding him lower, as though urging him to lie down. He doesn't know how long he stayed there, minutes, hours. The night stretched until it felt like no time passed at all. When he woke, the veil was gone, the other pilgrims gone, the garden empty. The statue of Saint Veronica stood as it does now, its own veil of stone concealing whatever face might lie beneath. Only his cane remained where he'd fallen, and the scrap of cloth clutched in his hand, a shred of linen, damp, bearing no mark, but the faint scent of something metallic. He rose. He did not look back, and he did not speak of what he saw for more than 50 years. When asked why, his eyes cloud over. He grips the cane tighter, as if the memory itself might pull him from the chair, because, he says, those who saw it truly saw it, never left. He pauses, draws a breath that seems to catch in his chest. Think I wasn't chosen. I think that's the only reason I'm here. He says the statue was built to mark the place where the veil appeared most often, not as a shrine, not as a holy relic, as a warning, a boundary to keep the others from kneeling where he and so many others had knelt. He leans forward, his voice dropping to a rasp. It doesn't forgive, it only listens, and once it hears you, it decides if you're meant to stand again. The room is silent after he finishes. No one moves, no one breathes loudly. Folded scrap of linen lies on the table between them, its edges darkened, a faint dampness clinging to its threads. Despite the warm air, the pilgrim does not look at it, does not touch it. He only stands and turns back toward the road that brought him here. As he reaches the gate, he stops, tilts his head slightly, as if listening to something far off. Beyond the walls, his lips move once, a whisper no one can hear. And then he steps through the gate alone that night. As the sisters shutter their windows, the whispers in the garden grow louder, still low, still distant, but now with a new rhythm, not a chant, not a prayer breath drawn in unison, as though many voices are pausing at once. And from the statue, from beneath the folds of the stone veil, a single drop of liquid forms. It falls to the base, spreads slowly across the pedestal, not clear, not dark-eyed, deep, metallic reddened. It does not dry. The first night, it looked like mist, a thin haze drifting down from the tree line, catching in the dim glow of the lanterns along the cloister. But as it settled, it did not vanish. It clung, fine, pale particles, so light they hung in the air when disturbed. Not rain, not dust touch it, came without wind, without smoke, no sign of fire. In the hills, no scent of anything burned, and yet, by dawn, the garden lay beneath a soft, gray film. The paths, the hedges, even the folds of the statue's veil, all shrouded as if by a second silent snowfall. Only the convent roofs beyond the garden wall were untouched. Not a single flake had drifted past the iron gate loft. There was the first to step into it. His boots sank slightly into the ash, leaving dark impressions behind him. The particles rose in tiny clouds at each step, coating his trousers, his sleeves. His breath, he bent to scoop a handful from the path. It was cool, dry, weightless. When he rubbed it between his fingers, it smudged into a faint gray streak on his skin, odorless, tasteless. But when he looked down again, he noticed something strange. His own footprints were still there, clear, deep. And as he stood watching, more appeared. Not his, not anyone's, from the convent, bare feet smaller than his. Lighter, the impressions shallow but distinct, each step perfectly aligned. Leading from the gate toward the pedestal of the statue, he turned his head instinctively, expecting to see someone just beyond his vision. But the garden was still, the air silent, and yet the prints continued, each new one appearing, as though pressed by an invisible weight, always forward, always toward the statue. Then, without pause, they descended. The footprints didn't stop at the base of the pedestal. They didn't turn or circle. They pressed into the earth just before the stone, and then sank deeper, not like a body descending stairs, not with any natural spacing or shift of weight. Each mark pushed straight down, as though the earth itself had opened, softened, welcomed what stepped there, and then they were gone. No return path, no disturbed soil, only a faint ring where the ash had thinned, as though whatever made the prints had passed entirely through the ground. Lothar said nothing to the sisters that morning. He swept the paths. He cleared the pedestal. The ash, for all its strangeness, yielded easily to the broom by midday. There was no sign it had ever been there. The sisters walked the garden without noticing. They did not see the faint depressions that remained beneath the freshly brushed soil. He did, but he kept his eyes on the hedges and said nothing that night. It fell again, thicker this time, enough to weigh on the leaves, to gather in the creases of the statue's veil until the fold seemed more cloth than stone. And again, it only touched the garden. The cloister walks were bare, the rooftops clean. Even the wind carried none of it beyond the gate. As if the ash obeyed a boundary no one could see, the sisters stayed inside. The Mother Superior locked every window facing the garden, forbidding even a glance into the night. But Lothar, restless, stood by the kitchen door, listening at first. There was only the faint hiss of the particles, settling, a soft, steady sound, like distant rain. But as the hours dragged on, another sound joined it, faint, slow, almost like the rhythm of a breath drawn through teeth. When dawn came, he stepped into the garden again. The ash was deeper now, nearly to his ankles in the low places between the paths. The statue loomed above, its features muted beneath the gray covering, the veil blending seamlessly with the settling dust. And again, the footprints. This time, more than one set, 2, 3 each bare, each moving with deliberate precision. They converged near the center path, crossing over one another like dancers, before trailing forward all toward the pedestal, all ending in the same place, pressed into the earth, vanishing downward. No sign of where they led, no sign of where they began. He crouched near one of the impressions, his fingers hovering just above the ash. The edges were sharp, fresh, as if made moments ago. Though the surface around them was undisturbed, he pressed his palm lightly against the ground beside one. The soil gave slightly beneath his hand, not much, but enough to feel hollow, as though there was space just beneath the surface, a cavity where no roots grew, no stones settled. He pulled his hand away, and that's when he heard a sound from below. Not movement, not a voice, a faint, steady sound, like something brushing against stone far beneath his feet, measured, repeating, almost dragging. It lasted only a few seconds, then stopped. The garden was still again. Lothar rose slowly, his knees stiff, his breath unsteady. He didn't look back at the footprints. He didn't brush away the ash. He simply walked to the gate, locked it behind him, and did not return until the sun was high enough to burn away every trace of gray that evening. The Mother Superior asked him if the garden was clear. He nodded, did not mention the impressions, did not mention the hollow soil. But as he walked away, he noticed something on his sleeve, a faint streak where the ash had clung to his coat. He brushed at it with his thumb. It smeared easily, but beneath it, the fabric was damp, not with water, not with rain. The faint, metallic scent rose from the thread, sharp, unmistakable. By the third morning, the ash no longer fell. The skies were clear, the paths swept clean, the statue stood bare once more. Lothar could not shake what he had seen, nor what he had felt beneath his hand. And when he passed the garden that afternoon, he noticed something new at the base of the pedestal. Not footprints this time, not soil disturbed, a line thin, almost invisible unless the light struck it, running from the lowest fold of the statue's veil, straight down to the ground, where the first footprints had vanished. It was not carved, not drawn, not painted. It was a streak of ash, pressed into the stone so fine it would not wash away when he ran his hand across it that night. The garden stayed silent. No whispers, no sound of settling, only the faint creak of the convent timbers as the wind pressed against the walls. But Lothar could not sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, he felt again the hollow soil beneath his palm, the measured, dragging sound in the earth, the way the footprints had ended, not turning back, not dispersing, just gone. And as he lay awake, he realized something he had not noticed until now. Every set of prints, every one that appeared in the ash, they were all facing the statue. Every step drawn inward, but not a single one had been leaving. The storm came without warning. No rolling thunder in the distance, no gradual darkening of the sky one moment. The convent lay beneath a heavy gray stillness the next. The wind rose with a howl that seemed to scrape along the stones. The walls of the cloister groaned, doors shuddered in their frames. The sisters gathered in the chapel, their prayers almost drowned beneath the roar. The garden beyond was swallowed in darkness. The lanterns along the paths were snuffed out one by one, their flames ripped away by sudden gusts. The statue of Saint Veronica stood unmoving, its silhouette barely visible through the sheets of rain. But beneath the sound of the storm, another noise emerged, a low, pulsing rhythm felt as much in the floorboards as in the ears, each vibration traveling up the wooden pews, through the sisters' folded hands, into their bones. The first crack came as the bell struck midnight, a deep, grinding sound from the direction of the garden. Not wood, not metal stone. The sisters froze, their voices faltered. The air inside the chapel trembled, dust falling from the rafters like faint snowfall. Then silence. The wind eased, the rain slackened for a moment. They thought the storm had passed, and that's when they heard Ida's sharp, splintering noise. Not like a branch breaking, more deliberate, a tearing sound, heavy and final. Echoing up through the flagstones, it came from beneath the statue. Lothair was the first to move. He took a lantern, stepped into the garden, and followed the sound. The rain had stopped, but the paths glistened with shallow pools. The air smelled not of wet earth, but of something colder, dry, metallic, like iron left too long in the sun. As he reached the pedestal, the lantern light revealed it. The base of the statue had split. The crack was narrow but deep, running along the back edge of the pedestal, where the soil dipped slightly from the rains. Through it, a faint breath of air escaped, not warm, not cold, just steady, as though from a space long sealed. He knelt, pressed his hand against the stone, and felt the faintest vibration like a slow heartbeat. Buried deep in the ground, the sisters joined him soon after. Some crossed themselves, others backed away. The Mother Superior, silent, gestured for Lothair to widen the gap. It took the better part of an hour. Chisels, hammers, muffled beneath cloth to avoid echoing in the still air, each strike loosening the old mortar, releasing a scent long trapped below. Not rot, not mold, just dry, stale air, heavy with dust, as if no breath had passed through it for decades. When the slab finally shifted, they found the opening, a narrow stair, descending into the earth beneath the statue. The steps were cut directly into stone, their edges sharp, unworn by use. The air that drifted up was still and dead, yet it carried with it a faint, almost imperceptible dampness that clung to their throats. Lothair held the lantern high. The light only reached so far. The rest of the stair sank into darkness. They descended slowly, each step echoed too long, as though the space around them was larger than the narrow passage should allow. The walls were bare, but smooth, the chisel marks faint as if polished by unseen hands. At the bottom, the passage opened into a chamber, small, circular, no windows, no vents, no openings beyond the stair they had come down. And yet, the air was thick, heavy, clinging to their skin. Like a low fog, the lantern revealed what lay within. 13 shapes, each one folded with precision, stacked carefully along the chamber's curved wall. Not paper, not wood veils. 13 veils each, pale and finely woven, arranged as though waiting. Lothair reached for the nearest one. His fingers brushed the fabric. It was wet, not damp from the air. There was none. The chamber was bone dry. The stone floor beneath their feet yielded no condensation. And yet, the veil clung to his fingertips as though freshly dipped in water. A bead of liquid formed along the hem. Trembling in the lantern light, he wiped his hand against his trousers. The moisture left behind a faint streak, not clear, not water darker, thicker. But before he could speak, One of the sisters gasped. Another veil, untouched, had begun to darken along its folded edge, slowly, deliberately, as though something within it had begun to seep outward. The Mother Superior's voice cut through. The rising unease. No discussion, no speculation. These will not remain open. She ordered the veils untouched. The chamber sealed before nightfall, consecrated mortar, blessed water along the edges of the stones, every seam closed. Every tool used washed and burned before returning inside the convent walls. Lothair worked quickly, his hands trembling despite the chill of the chamber. Each time he reached for the mortar, he felt the faint pulse of air from within the cracks. Not a draft, not the settling of stony breath, measured low, as though the chamber itself inhaled with every passing moment. By dusk, the last stone was set, the opening covered, the mortar smooth flush with the pedestal's base, leaving no trace of what had been uncovered below. Sisters watched from the cloister as the final tools were carried away. No one spoke, no one looked at the statue for longer than a glance. When the bell rang for evening prayers, the Mother Superior ordered the garden closed until further notice, the gates locked, the keys taken to her cell. But something wasn't right that night. Long after this, sisters had gone to their rooms. Lothair awoke to a sound, faint at first, almost imagined a soft, steady tap, like water dripping from a great height. He sat up, listening. The sound grew louder, clearer. Not dripping, not water fabric, wet fabric slapping softly against stone. In a slow, rhythmic motion, he rose, opened the shutters a crack, and looked toward the garden. The statue stood still, its veil catching the pale glow of the moon. The pedestal seemed solid, whole, but the sound did not stop. It carried through the air, and then through the ground beneath his feet, measured, unbroken, coming from below. By morning, the sound was gone. The pedestal remained sealed, no cracks, no openings. But when Lothair approached with the keys to tend the paths, he stopped at the gate. Something lay on the stone just before the garden entrance, a single strip of pale cloth folded neatly, cool to the touch and wet. When he lifted it, his hand came away, marked, not with water, not with acacia streak, dark and metallic, seeping slowly from the cloth, though the morning air was dry. He looked back toward the statue. The folds of its stone veil caught the light, and for a moment, he thought he saw them tremble. The path to the gardener's cottage winds along the edge of the garden wall, a narrow strip of dirt framed by low stone, where the grass never grows. The sisters pass it each morning on their way to the chapel, and each evening on their way back to their cells. But for 3 mornings and 3 nights, the cottage remains dark, its shutters drawn, its door closed. The smell of the oil lamp, once faint and constant near the door, is gone. No smoke, no light, only the sound of the wind through the trees beyond. At first, they assume he has gone to the village. The old man was prone to long absences when supplies ran low. But on the 4th day, one of the younger sisters notices something. His tools remain by the shed, stacked neatly, the handles still lined with a fresh coat of linseed oil from the last week. No sign of recent use, no sign of departure, and that's when they start to look. The cottage is empty. The bed is made. The hearth is cold. Ashes swept clean, as if no fire had burned there in days. His coat hangs by the door. His hat rests on the table, its brim still dusted faintly with gray from the ashfall. But there is no food missing from the pantry. No note, no sign he left on his own. The sisters fan out, walking the grounds in silence. The sun is low, casting long shadows across the hedges and walls. The air feels heavier than usual, damp in the way it feels before a storm. Though the sky remains clear, it is Sister Agnes who finds them first at the base of the statue. 2 boots set neatly, side by side, facing the pedestal, as though the wearer had been kneeling. The leather darkened, not by soil or rain, but by something pooled within. She kneels beside them, peering closer. The liquid is black, still no reflection on its surface. Even in the fading light, when she leans near, there is no scent of rot, no metallic tang, only a faint, unnatural cold rising from it. The ground around the boots is dry. The ash from the storm has long been cleared, yet the liquid does not seep, does not spread. It clings to the boots alone. As if bound by invisible edges, she reaches out, hesitates, then draws her hand back. Her breath quickens. But something wasn't right. The others arrive soon after. They stand in a circle, silent, their eyes fixed on the boots. Not one of them speaks his name. Not one asks where he has gone. The Mother Superior steps forward, her face unreadable. She crouches, takes the lantern from Lothar's old hook on the pedestal, and tilts the light toward the black surface. The glow does not catch the liquid, swallows it, an absence. Rather than a reflection, she straightens slowly. Her hand trembles as she gestures to the others. Bring nothing back? She says they return to the cottage before dawn. The sisters work without speaking, removing every belonging, his tools, his clothes, even the mat at his door, where his boots once rested. Each item's carried to the center of the garden, stacked carefully and doused in oil. When the torch is lit, the flames rise quickly, but they burn without smoke. The fire devours everything, yet leaves the air strangely still, as if the wind refuses to carry the scent when the last ember fades. The Mother Superior turns to the others. She does not look at the statue. Her eyes remain fixed on the empty patch of earth where the fire had burned. No one, she says, will speak his name again. That night, the convent feels hollow. The corridors stretch longer. Every step echoes, as though the stones have grown unfamiliar. The sisters remain in their cells, but few find sleep. Those who do wake before dawn, hearing faint sounds from beyond the garden wall. Not the wind, not animals soft. Deliberate steps pacing along the path where the grass will not grow. Each one slow, measured, never approaching the gate, never moving away, only circling, tracing the length of the wall until the first light breaks. By morning, the boots are gone. This pedestal stands bare. No trace of the liquid remains. The soil where they rested feels cold to the touch. Despite the warmth of the sun, the sisters avoid the garden. Tasks are reassigned. Paths go untended. The hedges, once trimmed weakly, grow wild. Their branches creep inward, casting narrow, twisting shadows across the statue's base. And still no one says his name that evening. As the bell tolls for prayers, Sister Agnes lingers by the cloister window, overlooking the garden. The light is fading. The paths below are empty. At first, nothing stirs, only the folds of the statue's veil, caught in the last glint of sun before night. But then she sees it, not the boots, not the gardener. A ripple at the base of the pedestal, the soil itself shifting, as though something beneath is breathing slow, deep. The faint rise and fall of earth, keeping rhythm with the toll of the bell. She backs away from the window, her hands shaking. By the time she glances back, the soil is still, the garden silent, but she does not tell the others what she saw. She simply joins them in the chapel, her voice trembling as she recites the prayers. That night, the wind carries a faint sound through the halls. Not footsteps, not whispers, a slow, measured trickle. Like water seeping through a narrow crack, it comes from the direction of the garden, from the pedestal itself. And as the sisters lie awake in their cells, the sound fades, not because it stops, but because it sinks lower, deeper, until it is no longer. In the air, it all lonely below waiting, the convent stood empty by the next spring. Its gates chained, its windows boarded, the once kept garden left to rot, its paths swallowed by creeping vines. The locals never saw the sisters leave. No wagons, no carriages. One day, their faint hymns still carried on the wind at dusk. The next, silence. The bell never rang again. The doors to the chapel hung open, as if they had not been closed behind them. The air inside smelled not of incense, but of something stagnant, dry, metallic. No one knew why they left, but travelers began to notice something else. Statue of Saint Veronica no longer faced the chapel. It had always stood fixed toward the cloister walk, its veiled head tilted slightly forward, as though listening to the prayers of those who passed now. It turned, not by much, just enough that its gaze no longer aligned with the walkway. Its blank face and heavy veil were angled toward the garden wall. The pedestal beneath it bore no sign of tampering, no cracks, no shifted soil, and yet no one could explain how its orientation had changed. Some claimed their memories were wrong, that perhaps it had always faced that way, but those who had visited before swore it had not. And that's when the whispers began. The first traveler heard it just after dusk, a merchant passing along the road, his cart rattling over the uneven stones. He paused by the convent gate, drawn by the stillness of the place at first. It sounded like wind through the hedges, a soft, steady rush beneath the fading birdsong. But when he leaned closer to the bars, he realized it was not wind at all. Voices, faint, countless voices, rising and falling in slow, unbroken cadence, not frantic, not mournful prayers. He pressed his ear to the cold iron. The words were too low to discern, the language unfamiliar, but the rhythm was clear. A chant repeated without pause, as though the ground itself was reciting something it had learned long ago. Then, just as he strained to hear more, the sound stopped. The merchant stepped back, heart pounding. The air was still. The hedges did not move. Even the faint hum of insects had faded, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the voices themselves. He turned to leave, but as his foot met the road, a new sound rose. Not voices, not wind, a faint, wet sound like fabric wrung slowly by unseen hands. It came from the direction of the statue. He did not look back. He drove his cart onward, the creak of the wheels, the only sound for the rest of the road. Others came curious, drawn by rumor. Some swore they saw the statue turn again, just slightly, as if following the travelers from within the overgrown garden. Others said the voices grew louder when one stood near the gate, but vanished entirely when they stepped inside the walls. A silence so deep it pressed against the eardrums, leaving a ringing long after they left. A shepherd who wandered too close one evening claimed the soil beneath the statue had shifted, that as he stood near, he felt the faint rise and fall beneath his boots, a rhythm slow and deliberate, as if something below was breathing. But when he knelt to touch the ground, he felt nothing, only cold soil, dry. Undisturbed, he left before nightfall and did not return by autumn. The convent was shunned entirely. Travelers took longer roads to avoid it. Merchants drove faster when passing its gates. The locals stopped speaking of it altogether, as if the place had simply ceased to exist. But at night, those who lived in the hills claimed they could still hear it, the faint hum of countless voices, carried not by wind, but by the ground itself, low, steady, always the same pace, always rising from beneath the soil. And when the moonlight struck the garden just right, some swore the statue no longer faced the wall. Its veil had turned again, slowly, deliberately, now angled toward the road, toward the travelers who still dared to pass. One night, a farmer traveling alone stopped at the gate. The moon was full, the shadows of the hedges long and jagged across the overgrown paths. He gripped the bars, peering toward the statue. It stood still, its veil catching the pale light. At first, the garden was silent, only the distant call of an owl breaking the stillness. Then, the voices began, low-layered, rising from the earth beneath the pedestal. A chorus, unbroken, their words still too faint to understand. The farmer pressed closer, the cold of the iron seeping into his hands. He closed his eyes, trying to make out even a single word, and that's when he heard a different voice, not in unison, not chanting, a whisper, close to his ear, though no one stood beside him. The words were sharp, wet, as though spoken through a mouth filled with water. It said his name. He froze, eyes snapping open. The garden lay still before him, the statue unmoving, the hedges lifeless in the breeze, but his name lingered, not in the air, but in his bones, as if the ground itself had carried the sound upward into his chest. He stepped back from the gate. The voices below quieted. Only the silence remained by the time he returned home. His hair had gone white at the temples. He did not tell anyone what he heard. No one passes the convent after dusk. The roads are empty, the gates rust, their hinges fused from years of disuse. The garden lies wild, the paths lost entirely to creeping roots and shadows. But those who have seen it by day swear the same thing. The statue still moves, its veil never pointing in the same direction twice, and no matter where it stands, its face is always tilted slightly, downward, as though listening, as though waiting. And on windless nights, when the world feels stillest, those who live nearest the hills still claim they hear it. Not the whispers, not the chant, just one sound, faint and rhythmic, carried up through the soil, the slow, deliberate drag of something moving beneath the earth, circling, never stopping, never leaving, waiting for someone to step inside the gates again. Garden is no longer a garden. The paths are gone. The hedges, once shaped by careful hands, rise like walls, their branches tangled into dark, unbroken masses. The earth is soft here, always damp, though it has not rained in weeks, and at its center, half swallowed by roots and creeping vines, the statue of Saint Veronica still stands. The veil hides her face, just as it did decades ago. But now, the stone looks darker, not stained, not cracked, just dulled, as though something in the air has leached the light from its surface. 3 figures step into the overgrown clearing, flashlights in hand, breath misting in the unseasonable cold. They are careful at first, their voices low, their laughter strained and forced. Each step brings the crunch of dead leaves beneath their boots. Each beam of light cutting through the haze that lingers just above the soil. One of them films. His hand is steady, but his voice carries a note of unease. He cannot mask. He pans slowly toward the pedestal, and that's when they see it. The base of the statue is broken, not toppled, not shattered, split open along the same line it was sealed all those years ago. Mortar is gone, its once smooth seams fractured into jagged edges. The crack gapes wide, revealing a hollow blackness beyond the air. Rising from it is cold, not a natural chill, but dry, flat, devoid of scent, as though the earth below has been closed off from the surface for longer than memory can reach. They shine their lights downward. The beams sink into the dark. The hollow is deeper now, far deeper than the old records ever described a shaft carved into the stone, its walls too smooth to be natural, descending at a steep angle into the earth. One of them leans closer, the camera trained on the opening. His breath catches, but not from the cold pinned along the walls. Just at the edge of the light are strips of cloth. At first, they look like remnants of old banners, frayed at the edges, pale and still against the rock. But as the beams catch them fully, the texture becomes clear, fine linen, folded flat, each piece stretched tight by rusted pins driven into the stone veils. Dozens of them, their fabric yellowed with age, but not crumbling, each one marked with faint dark stains along the edges, as though moisture once touched them and then retreated. And on every veil, pressed deep into the weave, is a shape not painted, not sewn, a relief, formed as though something once pushed hard from the other side. Each one different, each one a face, some are calm, their features soft and resigned. Others are contorted, mouths open as if mid-breath, eyes wide though no color fills their sockets. Explorers do not speak at first. The camera drifts from one veil to the next, its lens catching the fine ridges where the linen holds the shapes of lips, brows, and teeth. And then one of them whispers, almost to himself. They're still warm. The others turn to him. He holds his hand inches from a veil, not touching, but close enough to feel it. The shaft's air is cold, yet a faint heat radiates from the cloth, pulsing gently, as though rising from something beneath its surface. He pulls his hand back, his breath quickening. The camera lingers on the nearest veil, its faint texture moving in the flashlight's glare as the fabric tightens slightly, then relaxes. A sound carries up the shaft, soft, steady, not wind, not dripping water, breathing, slow and deep, in rhythm with the subtle movements of the cloth. The one holding the camera whispers, "Do you hear that?" And that's when he heard it. Another sound, faint and separate, not from below, not from the veils, from behind them, near the pedestal, above. A single, deliberate step on soft earth, followed by another measured, unhurried. The camera jerks upward, the beam of light catching the cracked edge of the pedestal. The opening above is empty, but the sound does not stop. It circles the statue, slowly, as though tracing the old paths of the garden. The explorers freeze. Their breathing quickens, each inhale, loud in the close air. The circling stops, the garden above goes still. Only the breathing from below remains. They start to climb out, their movements fast, their voices low and clipped. One keeps the camera trained on the hollow as they ascend, the beam still fixed on the rows of pinned veils. As the first of them reaches the top, the camera shifts slightly, catching one last glimpse of the shaft's walls. The nearest veil moves, not in the subtle tightening they saw before, not with the slow rhythm of the breath beneath this time. It ripples outward, as though something behind it is pressing forward, pushing the shape of a face closer to the surface. Its mouth opens, the linen stretching without tearing. The sound that follows is faint, wet, and low. Not a word, not a scream, just a single drawn-out exhale, as though whatever is inside is tasting the air for the first time. The camera jolts, a muffled shout. The lens tilts wildly, catching only flashes of the cracked pedestal, the overgrown hedges, and the pale stone of the statue. Then, darkness. The footage ends there. No sound beyond the static hum of the recorder. No trace of the explorers on the grounds the following morning. Only the open pedestal remains, the shaft beneath it yawning into the earth, its walls lined with linen faces. And when locals pass the convent gates in the weeks after, they swear they hear something new. Not the whispers, not the old, steady breath from below. A faint sound carried up through the hollow, in a cadence unfamiliar, yet deliberate. Not speech, not chant. The slow, unbroken rhythm of fabric being drawn across stone, sliding upward, closer, always closer, until the sound fades, not because it stops, but because it sinks again, deeper into the earth, waiting for the next set of footsteps to cross the garden. Some say the statue of Saint Veronica was meant to capture a moment of mercy, but in the garden, beneath the earth, it became something else, a mirror for those sins no one dares to name, and like all mirrors, it reflects whether you wish to see it or not.